In that case, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, which is Ashley Jones from the Southwest Regional Organised Crime Unit, who's going to be talking to us about fraud and fraud prevention. So, Andy, the floor is yours, as they say.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to speak to you tonight. Right, I'll just share my screen with you so you can see my slides. And hopefully you see that there. Can you all see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You got some slides there about scams. Yeah, okay. Right, let's just get ourselves moving along. Right, so thank you for the introduction. Ash Jones is the name, and I work for the Regional Organised Crime Unit in the Southwest. A lot of people never heard of that. It is an umbrella law enforcement agency which provides support to the 5 constituent forces which make up the Southwest. It's a Home Office funded body, and it basically is made up of officers from those 5 forces who provide specialist functions to support the local forces. And I work on the Regional Economic Crime Unit. Now, I'm not a police officer. In fact, I retired from the police in December, and now I am a police staff member, as they call it. So let us go forward. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about fraud. Interesting that there's a number of international guests at your Rotary Club tonight, because the content is entirely relevant wherever you live in the world. So hopefully you may take something away from the presentation tonight, and it might protect you in the future. Now, fraud is a really impactful crime, even though it doesn't make the headlines that often, because typically nobody dies in a fraud. It's a sort of low threat to human life offence, but it is enormously devastating when it comes to its impact upon people. And I'd like to just give you a few slides at the beginning to give you an idea of the impact of fraud. Now, we estimate, and I'll explain why we estimate, the impact of fraud in 2019 to the UK economy is estimated to be about 190 billion British pounds. So, 190,000 million. It's a vast sum of money. Statistics from the National Crime Agency, and it is almost incomprehensible the amount of money and the impact that this has on society. This equates to around about just under 4 million individual instances of fraud which are reported in 2019. So this is an everyday offence for many, many thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. Now, when I say 190 billion, that actually equates to all fraud. But when we break it down into individual categories, organisations, businesses, the statutory sector, the government, and individuals. And of course, the individuals is the you and I, the important bit here. And that equates to a loss of about 7 billion estimated. So a vast sum of money. And what can you do with 7 billion? It's worth looking at that, actually. 7 billion is the entire annual budget for the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. So a substantial cabinet responsibility to the government. It's the department which looks after all the national museums and things like that. So a lot of money, and their budget is just below 7 billion. But that is all hemorrhaged away to fraud. Another way, and a more realistic way of looking at it, is if you were to take that 7 billion, it would pay for 17,500 heart transplant operations on the National Health Service. They currently cost about 40,000 each. So a huge amount, a life-changing operation. And that's the sort of cost that it has to the economy. So it's a big old thing. Now, when we look at fraud, the Crime Survey of England and Wales tells us that fraud makes up 34% of all reported crime that we get in the United Kingdom in 2019. So that's all the murders, rapes, thefts, public order offences, everything. But fraud makes up 34%, over a third of all of those reported crimes. So it is the most prevalent crime type that you and I are likely to encounter. You're far more likely to be the victim of a fraud than a burglary, a personal theft, or a robbery. In fact, statistically, you're 55% more likely to be the victim of a fraud than or 55 times rather, more likely to be the victim of a fraud than a robbery. So much, much more prevalent. And there we go. Those are the statistics. I think it is currently something like 13 times more likely to be the victim of a burglary than a fraud. Sorry, vice versa, fraud than a burglary. So, you know, as an average person, your biggest concern is probably your home, your sanctuary being burgled by a stranger. You know, much more likely to be attacked by a fraud. And one of the reasons it's a problem for law enforcement is it is what we term as a hidden crime. Now, what I mean by that is that when I started my police career many years ago, the vast majority of crimes I encountered tended to have witnesses. They tended to happen in a public place. You know, they would be assaults or public drunkenness, fighting outside a pub, thefts, things like that. They would tend to happen in a public location where there would be likelihood of it being seen by other people or captured by a CCTV surveillance camera. Frauds, by and large, tend to be intimate offences. They tend to happen between the victim and the offender alone. They tend to happen in somebody's abode, as their home, and it tends to happen via some sort of communication device, telephone or the internet. So unless the victim reports it, nobody's aware it's happened. And if that's the case, support and preventative activity can't be put in place. So we can't save that person becoming a victim again and again and again. And if you are the victim of a fraud, you're far more likely to be the victim again and again. So it's very high recidivist rate. So hidden crime, we don't know about it. We can't do anything about it if it's not reported. And in fact, our best guess, and it's only an estimate by the Office of National Statistics, is that only 15% of fraud gets reported. The rest is, you know, either not reported because the victim is embarrassed, ashamed, they're fearful of repercussions if they report it. They're fearful that if they tell somebody that they've, you know, lost a large sum of money, that they will be, you know, they lose their liberty, they'll be placed in a care home, or they lose control of their finances, particularly with aging people. So it gets unreported. So when I told you earlier that actual fraud makes up about 3.8 million reports per year, we only believe that's 15% of it. So you can see its true size and impact. But there is a positive. This is not all bad news here tonight. The positive news is that as much as 80% of fraud can easily be prevented as long as we take ameliorative steps to stop it happening. And this is the important part. This is the meat in the sandwich of what I'm going to tell you tonight. Now, the first thing you need to know is that the vast amount of frauds these days use some form of social engineering to perpetuate their fraud, what they're trying to sell you, the deception, the scam, or whatever you'd like to call it. Now, social engineering is defined as being the clear manipulation of the natural human tendency to trust. And the vast majority of us go through life genuinely believing what people tell us, even strangers. If somebody tells us something, whatever it may be, you know, the volcano is about to erupt, we tend to believe them because we've got no reason to disbelieve them. And that's the way that the human brain works. Somebody tells you something, you will naturally believe it. And this is where the fraudster preys upon people, because they try to make you, they prey upon your emotions. They try to make you make decisions based on your feelings rather than your thinking. And if you think, you tend to make better decisions than if you make a decision based on emotional feelings. So social engineering, which is how they sell their frauds to us. The other thing which is quite used by the criminal, the fraudster, is that even if we're suspicious of something, human nature says that we are quite poor, bad, in fact, at saying no. Particularly people in a later life, you know, age range, because they tend to be quite courteous. They tend to have been brought up to trust, believe, and obey authority figures. Certainly people who say they're things like police officers or local government officials, generally speaking. And this is where the offenders, you know, really prey upon people. They get you into situations where you feel uncomfortable saying no. Actually, we tell people that, you know, use some alternative to no. You know, if you feel uncomfortable about a situation, say something like, you know, I'm not in a position to make that decision. I need to refer to somebody else who will give me authority to do that, or I want to speak to my partner, or whatever. Buy yourself decision or thinking time by putting a buffer between you and that decision. If you don't feel comfortable saying no, there's nothing wrong with saying no, by the way. I highly encourage it, but, you know, use an alternative. Now, I'm going to talk about some of the frauds you're most likely to encounter. so that if you encounter them, you recognize them and you can take steps appropriately. Now, I'm talking about large groups of fraud here. The largest group of fraud you're most likely to encounter, we refer to in the business as advance fee fraud. And this is generally where the fraud itself will be offering you something. Typically, as you can see here, you know, the bait to the trap will be some form of free money or free thing which you're being offered. And it can be all sorts of things we'll talk about in a moment, but this is what drags you in. This is the trap. And the simple things, which they are generally, are things like lottery prize fraud. Now, you've probably all heard of these. This is where you get a phone call or an email out of the blue, which will say, congratulations, you know, your email address has been entered into a prize draw and it's been drawn and you've been successful, you've won. And you have £10,000 waiting for you to claim. In order for you to receive that claim, you know, you have to pay £250 as an admin fee, which may or may not be refundable, blah, blah, blah. But what they're trying to get you to do is pay some money to get money back. And this relies upon good old human greed. You think you've got a large payout coming, so you will tend to go along with the thought process and, you know, you pay your £250 thinking it's a reasonable risk and gamble. But what you don't realize, of course, is that fraudster is raking in these multiple £250 because you haven't won a lottery. The simple advice is if you win a competition or a prize fund or a lottery that you don't have any knowledge or memory of entering, it's too good to be true. The other thing is inheritance fraud. Big thing here in the UK, which is where typically you might get a phone call out of the blue or an email saying that this is somebody who's tracking down the next of kin to a long distant relative who's died intestate, so they have no defined lines of legacy for their estate, which is substantial, and you know, you are in line for a substantial bequest. But to access that money, the heir hunter who's tracked you down requires you to pay £500, which will be their one-off fee, and then he'll put you in touch with the people dealing with the legacy. As you can imagine, you pay your 500, you'll never hear anything else. And a simple one at the bottom, gambling tips, things like this. There's many different types where you'll be contacted, possibly because you do gamble, you've been involved in some sort of website or whatever, and your name, your details may have been abstracted for criminal purposes. And you'll get an email saying, you know, we can provide you with insider information. They'll be offering you some form of, you know, specialist information or service in order for a fee will be required in order for that to be released to you. So this is what we call advance fee fraud. You're being asked for money up front with the promise of a big bonus, a big payment, a balloon payment or something coming afterwards. Another very common fraud is software service fraud. This is where you might get a phone call or an email telling you, typically phone call, where you get a phone call saying a virus has been detected by Microsoft or Apple on your device, your computer, your iPad or whatever you use to communicate online, and they're in a position to rectify that. What you need to do is to download some software which they will send you, which will allow them to go into your computer and sort it out. Typically what they'll be doing is actually downloading a virus into your computer, remote access or whatever, to harvest your information, because your personal details are as valuable to these people as cash money, because with that information they can do all sorts of things. And that's what they want. They simply want to harvest your information that's on your computer. Similarly, you can see the Netflix symbol there. I mean, another very common one is a phone call saying there's something gone wrong with your Netflix payments, your direct debit, or however you typically pay it. And the service is going to be cut off. It's going to be denied unless you re-establish that payment. So fortunately, they're in a position to take your details right here and now to sort it all out. And they will try and get you to divulge your personal or financial information. That's a very common one. Safe account fraud, interesting one, because it involves the police. You'll often get a phone call alluding to be from a police officer involved in an investigation who will tell you that your funds are at risk. There is some criminal activity involving your bank account currently taking place. And in order to safeguard your funds, they would like you to transfer your money to a special police-approved safe bank account where it can be protected. And they'll give you the details to that, hoping that you will transfer that money. Unfortunately, the police will never enact any sort of investigation of this nature And if you transfer your funds to this so-called safe account, it'll be disappeared within moments, and you'll never be able to reclaim that, unfortunately. So that's what they try and get you to do. They try and get you to move your money from your actually quite safe bank account into a nefarious account from which they can steal your funds. More common, perhaps, is this type of scam, which you will see around bank accounts. It suggests it's from a bank, the Barclays in this case, could be any bank at the top. Imagine the symbol of your own bank, and it suggests, and that the stories are very different. You know, the covers. This one particularly says they're doing a software upgrade, and they'd like you to click on that blue hyperlink, which will confirm your identity. And of course, again, what they're seeking is to harvest your personal information. Again, no bank will ever ask you to confirm your identity in this nature, because they know it. You know, if you take part in online banking, again, there are protocols you'll be aware of if you undertake that, and none of it involves you responding to an unsolicited email and providing your personal information. If any email arrives out of the blue pretending to be from your bank, it is almost certainly a scam. There we go. Courier fraud, very common one. Similar links really to that bank one I talked about earlier, where you may get a telephone call, typically a phone call, and it'll tell you that you're speaking to a police officer and they're dealing with an investigation involving your branch of the bank. And your bank or building society or whatever institution you financially shop with is involving some sort of money laundering. And in order to catch the money launderers at the branch of your bank, the police have put some marked notes into the banking system. And what they would like you to do is support and assist their investigation, pop along to your bank, draw out £10,000, £20,000, bring it home, and then package it up. And somebody from the police will knock on your door and ask you for that package. They will take it away, take it immediately to the forensic science laboratory, where it will be tested, and then they'll be able to confirm who's involved with this money laundering at the bank, and it'll be a great assistance there, relying upon your service here as a public-spirited citizen. And of course, what actually happens is that that phone call is from a fraudster, and they send a taxi driver, no more than that, to collect the package with the instructions to bring that package to a third party in a lay-by or some other mutually agreeable place. They'll take the package, drive away. That's how the scam works. Now, whilst I've been saying this, you'd probably be thinking, nobody be caught out with that, surely. About 3 years ago, I used to be the neighbourhood sergeant in a small seaside town in North Somerset. I was sat in my office, and the front office person came up to me and said, "Sarge, there's somebody at the front counter. What they're saying is concerning me. Can you have a chat?" And he was an elderly chap who received that very same phone call. He'd gone to his building society, he'd drawn out £20,000, and he only called into the police station because it lay in between his home address and the building society. And he thought he'd pop in just to confirm that it was correct, because it sounded a bit fishy to him. If the police station hadn't been on his journey, he would not have stopped, and he would have taken that money home and given it away. We protected him from giving the money away. So this does happen. People do fall for this. They're so plausible, articulate, and believable that, and they use social engineering, they get you to believe it, that people do lose vast sums of money. Now, the HM revenue and customs scam, a bit like the bank one, what you get is an email out of the blue telling you, it's an advance free fraud in a way. You get, you'll do a rebate, £244.17. Sounds quite reasonable, unusual sum of money. This is a genuine scam email, by the way. And what they're asking you to do here is to click on that refund hyperlink you can see just halfway down. All looks rather plausible, lots of sort of logos and the like. And you'll come to this next page where and this is the important one, they're trying to harvest your information. They want your name, address, and as you can see, all the other stuff there, mother's maiden name, bank account, sort number. And what they want are the keys to the safe. I describe these as the keys to the safe, because when your bank takes responsibility for your funds, they give you certain things in return. They give you things like your bank account number, your sort code, and those sort of things, security codes. And they say to you, these are yours, they're important, you're responsible for these. And if you were to give them to a third party who subsequently steals your money from your theoretical safe for which your keys fit, the bank are not responsible, because they've given you safekeeping of those keys. You've treated those keys with irresponsibility and somebody's stolen your money. You will not get your money back if you give away your personal details under this nature. So the answer to this question is you never generally respond to anything on an unsolicited email telling that you've owed money, you've got some special fund money coming in your direction. So if you ever receive any information alluding to be from a government agency or a financial institution, we never share any information with them. We certainly don't give them privileged information like our names, our home addresses, our dates of birth, mother's maiden names, let alone stuff like our financial details. Because no government agency will ever ask you to divulge this information, because we're all exceptionally aware of the risk of fraud. This is called identity fraud, which is where they seek to harvest your information so that they can either access your account or they will clone your details. So they'll open up another bank account using all of those privileged information that they have. They'll run up massive debts and things like that, get loans. And the first you know about it is where you start to get information from loan recovery companies asking, where's our money? Of course, you know nothing about it. Investment fraud, very much on the rise at the moment, particularly during the lockdown period, because the interest rates have dived and people with a little bit of savings have been looking for alternative avenues to raise income. And fraudsters are aware of this. They've enormously increased their activity in this area. The most common way they do it actually is to create online clones of websites. So if you're looking around, they're looking for some financial assets to invest in, things even like government bonds, premium bonds, things like that. What they will do is they will clone the actual government website and make an identical replica of it with a similar email address, and they'll even use the names and spoofed email addresses of people. Oh, Christ, beg your pardon, somebody's trying to ring me. The spoofed email addresses of people who really work in those banks to get you to believe in it. And it's really, really on the rise. So if you are looking to invest and you're doing so online and you come across a website offering very good returns, almost too good returns, be very careful. Don't necessarily believe what you see on any website. They can be cloned, and they often are. Even clones of the most prestigious and respected banks are popping up. So do your due diligence. If you see a website, you go on it, even if it's from a really reputable bank, have a poke around, check that it's really what it appears to be. Because spoofing is very popular. This is where people can use technical, marvelry really, to make an email appear as if it's from, for instance, the HSBC bank or whatever. Or telephone calls, they can spoof telephone numbers. So if you're looking at your phone and a number comes up and you recognize that number as being from your bank, it may not be. Just do not believe what you see these days. Confirm it and make sure it is what it appears to be, because somebody may be trying to pretend they're somebody who they're not. Remember, fraud is all about deceit. Romance fraud, really on the up. Now, a lot of people, look down at the ground and mutter when I say romance fraud, but it's more than just what you think. It's not just dating websites and things like that. It's websites where people go to for companionship. It could be forums where people are, have a mutual interest. It's the same thing, really. Although romance fraud is the title we give it, it can be anything. It can be people who enjoy sailing. I heard you gentlemen talking about sailing earlier, or woodworking, or whatever, knitting for ladies, whatever it can be. It could be a relationship which formulates to a common interest. Can be romance. These are really, really on the up, particularly during the lockdown period, where people have been deeply affected by loneliness and isolation, and they've used the internet, perhaps for the first time, to reach out to make new connections and friendships. The advice we give, of course, is that if you are using internet mechanisms to meet new people, when it comes to romance fraud, the people that you meet will typically give reasons why they can't speak to you on face-to-face time or Zoom or whatever, why they can't meet you in real time, if they even live near to you, if they're saying they live nearby. And very soon after building a relationship, which will become full on really quickly, not a typical slow burner as people meet and get to know each other perhaps, but very quickly they'll be, professing their love or deep-seated fondness for you in a friendship or relationship. And then very quickly after that, will come the request for money. It might be because they need a dire medical operation. Maybe they could be abroad and they need the money to pay for something else, which is highly necessary, damage to their roof, or it could be, a family member is ill, or whatever it may be. Or they may ask for you to vote for them and to give, your bank details for some other reason or another. But the point is really clear. If you do meet somebody online, it seems strange the way that they're behaving. You may find they may ask you for money. What we say to people is exercise skepticism, treat these things with slow time, and particularly if somebody starts asking you for money, nobody you meet should be asking you for money. It is quite outside the ordinary, and it should be a red flag for you. Now, there's nothing wrong with online dating. I met my wife online, so I'm not decrying it, but exercise skepticism. Doorstep crime. I'm not going to spend virtually any time on this because it is on the decline. Obviously, during the last year, people are not knocking on doors. Distraction burglars, road traders. I go as far as to say, if anybody knocks on your door and professes to be from the police or any government agency, take their identity card off them, shut the door, confirm their identity, and be 100% certain before you you allow anybody to enter your property. I'll say no more than that. Where are we? Scam mail. Now, I've talked about the majority of crimes I've talked about, frauds tend to come via way of the telephone, which is the most common, and the internet, second most common, but they still come through the letterbox. We've got a pretty good mail system in the UK still, and you may get a letter. It's going to be a relationship to one of the previous frauds I've talked about, but the most common are advance fee frauds, where they will tell you you've won £20,000, and in order to access that 20,000, they will ask you to pay an admin fee up front, or they will ask you to provide them with your bank account details so that they can transfer the money electronically into your account. Again, same as the previous ones, we never share our financial information or personal details with people we can't see and confirm who they are. So rounding up, I've got some golden rules which will keep you safe. First of all, and it's a simple one, and I've said it once tonight already, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. If I came into your kitchen tonight and said to you, you can eat as much of my magic cake as you want, but you will lose weight if you do so. The cake tastes wonderful, but you're not going to gain weight, you're going to lose it. You will not believe me, excuse me, because it sounds too good to be true. Little voice in your brain will be saying, rubbish, that's not possible. However, when people are involved in frauds, that old human instinct of greed takes over, and somebody's saying, I've got £20,000 here with your name on it. If you pay me £100 fee to release it, you can have it. It sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Another common symptom of fraud is the fact that the fraudsters will apply a time pressure to get you to make a poor decision. Again, it works upon the fact that you react poorly under pressure. Humans do. What they will say is, this offer that I'm making to you today, either to repay your debt or to get this inheritance, which you'll do. It's only valid for an hour. If you don't take this up, I'm going to the next person on the list, and they're going to get this inheritance. And it basically gets you to make a decision you wouldn't make ordinarily. So if anybody applies a time pressure to you, it's a good sign it's a fraud. We never hand over cash money to anybody. If somebody knocks on the door and tells us they can see damage to our roof and they can fix it right now, and it's going to cost £500 cash in hand, no questions asked. But it's a one-time only offer, and it's only got an hour, and I'm going to charge £1,000 after that. I can assure you it's almost certainly a scam or a fraud of some kind. If you hand cash money over to somebody, we will never see that money again. That's my advice on that front. And when I'm talking about money, another point is quite relevant here. If anybody is ever enacting any business with you online or on the telephone, and they ask you to pay for something in an unusual way, they might say, I'd like you to pay for this by way of a Western Union transfer from your local post office, or I'd like you to send me currency in dollars, or whatever, from any part of the world. Or even more strangely, quite recently, we've having reports of people being asked to make payments for things using either vouchers, Apple vouchers, you know, for you can buy top-ups for Apple devices. You know, go to your local shop, buy £1,000 in vouchers, Apple vouchers, and post them to me, or just give me the code number on those vouchers, and then they can, you know, it's effectively a way of laundering money. So we never do that. I've already said it probably more than once, but I'll repeat it for the point of, you know, making the emphasis. We never provide our personal details or financial details to somebody who we are not 100% certain they are who they say they are. And in my life, in my world, I never give those details to somebody who I can't look in the eye. If they're not standing in front of me and I'm not 100% certain I know who they are, they don't get that information. Simple as that. And if you find yourself in a position where you're really tossing and turning, you don't know what you should do, seek second opinions. Ask for somebody else's advice, because quite often when you're in the eye of the tornado, so much is going on around you, you don't get a full grasp of what's happening, and you might make a poor decision. But if you speak to a neighbor, relative, friend, or whomever who is available to you, they will give you an objective view which will be different to your own, and it might help you recognize that scam and a fraud. Don't be afraid to ask. Simple advice I always give people: if you're on the verge of paying for something, or if you're on the verge of giving money over to something, get yourself a buffer in time so you can think about it. That buffer, cup of tea. Make yourself a cup of tea, gives you time to think about it. Simple as that. Never ever be afraid to report it if you have fallen the victim of a fraud. If you've done something, if you've given your financial details away, or you've given money over to somebody, and then half an hour later you think, damn, I shouldn't have done that, but it's too late now, or you're embarrassed, or you feel ashamed, or whatever. If you make that call, if you report it to Action Fraud, or report it via an email, they can still recover your file. But really, you want to report it to your bank, because they can stop transactions, they can recover money. If you don't report it, there's no chance. If you do report it, there's a chance we can recover those funds. And just to finish off, I will just enlighten you with what I call the Gazelle Theory, because I've met many, many, many people who have been the victim of a fraud. And I'll explain where the gazelle comes in here, really, because the gazelle, and the gazelles we see on the screen there, or I don't know what they are, impalas, they're new. It's their first season on the plain in Africa, on the savannah, and they've never seen one of these before. Even though they've never seen a leopard, instinctively they know that they should run away from the leopard and not towards it. If they go against that instinct, they won't be alive very long, but they will run away from danger. And I've met so many fraud victims who will tell me after the fact, do you know what? When I was in this situation where the person was telling me that they were a police officer and they wanted me to go along with this investigation, do you know what? Something didn't sound right. Something felt wrong about it, but I went ahead with it because I thought I should. And what they've done, they've gone against their instinct. Now, the impala's instinct is to run away, and they don't go against their instinct. They run away, it keeps them alive. If these fraud victims had gone with that instinct, they would have protected themselves from financial exploitation. But they overcame their instinct because they were either greedy, they thought they should have money, there was money coming, or they thought they were complying with a genuinely honest instruction from somebody who they respected, a person in authority, somebody from the bank, somebody from the building society, police officer, or whomever it may be. But they overcame their instinct, and that was their downfall. So my advice here, folks, is if you find yourself in any situation and your instinct is telling you to run away, do the old gazelle thing, go with it, right? Because what's the worst thing that could happen, right? You get, if somebody's going to give you a pile of money, they're not going to, be thwarted at the first attempt. They'll come back time and time again, right? It doesn't happen, to be honest. It's too good to be true. Another part of my theory here, but be the gazelle. If you get that instinctive little thing that says this ain't right, get out of it. Put the phone down, walk away. And if you find yourself, you have been the victim, pick up the phone, ring your bank, building society, and then report it to Action Fraud, which is the government report line. You can either telephone them or you can drop them an email, and they've got very strong internet presence. Just type in Action Fraud and it'll all come to you and you know where to go. There we go. Sorry, couldn't afford a leopard. It was only my cat. So there we are, folks. simple advice is on the screen for frauds and the like. Now, I'm not going to insult your intelligence by going over that, but there we go. Now, do any of you have any questions about fraud, or even perhaps would like to share with us a situation where you have come close yourself?
Well, thank you for that, Ashley. Before I actually open up the questions, just a couple of things I wanted to pick up on there. You've just asked for two situations where we may have experienced it ourselves. I can think of two straight away for myself. One, supposedly a letter from my bank on less than what I'd call standard quality paper from the bank. The printing looked dodgy, spelt my name wrong and my address wrong, asked me to make contact to confirm my details. So that was certainly a bit of a dodgy one.
Good one or a bad one?
Yeah, scaredy. But when I went to my bank to talk to them about it, they tried to phone the telephone number on the actual letter to confirm it's legit. And it's like, no, don't phone that number. Look up your own security guy's number. And then the other thing I was going to pick up on, you mentioned about the old HMRC scams, say like sort of text messages, etc. Where I used to work, we actually shared an office with HMRC down here in Plymouth, and it's quite funny. Every now and again, a few of us in the office would get these text messages coming through to say we've got a tax rebate or whatever. So we'd just go to the next office and say, "Yeah, guys, another one for you guys to look at." I mean, we just burst out laughing because we'd get sort of, well, in an office of about 20, 25 of us, you can guarantee we'd be getting about a dozen or so of these a week. How
would be? I wish I had ever had a rebate, but one has never come my way.
Thankfully, not. Thankfully, I've not had many in recent times. Okay, so I'd like to open the floor to any questions. So, has anyone got any questions for Ashley? I'm sure there must be some.
Ash, yeah, I had a letter at my company today, which was definitely a fraud, but it looked very genuine. I can't remember what it was. I stuck it through the shredder, but it was something like OCR or OC Office of something or other. And only by going onto Google and looking and putting in ?fraud and the name of this group did it come up as being a fraudulent letter. And I can't remember the group, but what did seem to be apparent was the fact they had got these spoof websites and everything else. And I just thought, is it not a crime for them to be, they were asking for subscriptions of like £85 that every company has to pay or something to protect their information. It just, I couldn't understand how they could be sending out so many official looking letters with all the associated websites to go with it. I can't remember which company it was, but it was saying that we had to, companies had to register and you had to pay about 95 quid, or you'd get fined 5,000 quid.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very common one. As broad as your imagination is as broad as the mechanisms they will try. You know, they make up acronyms for government agencies that don't exist. They'll formulate a corresponding website which looks really, convincing. The letter might say, go to this website, make your payment to prevent you going to county court because you failed to pay this, that, or the other. My advice is quite simply: if you ever get anything which alleges to be from a government agency, treat it with absolute disregard or assume it's a fraud unless you can prove otherwise.
Thank you.
It's a tragic thing to say, but that's the way it is.
Can you hear me okay? Do these fraudsters have the ability to hack into recognized websites? Because I was actually on the Amazon website this afternoon and it suddenly clicked up that if I clicked here, I would have a chance of winning an iPhone 11. And I thought, that looks interesting. So I clicked on it. I didn't win it the first time. It said you can have a second go. Then offered me an iPhone 11 for £1.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'm not giving away my details because I'm not buying anything through my choice. So I came out of it. But it was so legitimate because I was actually on the Amazon website when this popped up onto my iPad.
It's quite possible.
It popped up on a little website.
Yeah. Well, you did the right thing, right? You did the Gazelle thing. It sounded too good to be true, and that's the first indication normally that a fraud is a little bit spurious. more often than not, that is the first thing that gives them away, because otherwise, obviously you can't get a device like that for £1. And it's that whole greed instinct that they're hoping to get you going. But even with respected websites like Amazon, obviously an element of stuff on there is outside of their control. They have vast websites. They're constantly being probed and hacked by, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of potential criminals who are seeking to sort of gain some control over it. I wouldn't rule anything out when it comes to technology, because the advancements are so vast that it changes from day to day. I just treat everything with a healthy skepticism, and I take it from there.
Any more questions for Ashley?
Yeah, how successful are the police efforts, and how under-resourced are they in this respect?
Police efforts are terrible when it comes to the detection of fraud, quite simply because quite a lot of what I've talked about tonight originates outside of UK national borders, because obviously the internet makes the world a tiny, tiny place. I mean, some of us sat in this virtual room tonight are from thousands and thousands of miles away, and it is as if we're sat in the next room physically. The same goes for the criminal, and they exploit this avenue of sort of advanced human technology to their advantage. And of course, British law enforcement, yes, it has been under-resourced, fraud, for obvious reasons. I mean, nobody dies at the consequence of a fraud. However, the cost is now becoming to a point where there is significant uplift. And you'll have heard probably in the annals of history now in the news, where the government promised a 20,000 uplift of British police officers when they went for the last election. And they're seeing good on that, and a good proportion of that uplift is coming to the fraud world. I know in the world which I work in, the Regional Economic Crime Unit, we are seeing a significant uplift in officers being recruited, and their job will specifically be the detection of fraud. So I work on the sort of disruption side. I'm trying to stop it happening. There is a whole team of guys who go after the offenders, and those who can be tracked down, they are brought to justice. But it's a minute scale when taken as a whole, because this is such a good source of money. Organised criminals, they don't rob banks anymore. If you walk into a bank, you walk out with 10 grand and we'll probably catch you. If you rob an elderly lady of her life savings, the chances are she won't even report it, and nobody will come looking for you if you do it online. So they're taking the easy route, unfortunately.
I saw George had a hand up just now, so I know George's got a question. I know, and Shannon's also put a question in the chat. So, George, if we can have your question first, and then Shannon. You need to unmute yourself, George. George, you need to. That's it.
Yeah, we're told to keep our bank details to ourselves, but every time we use a check, the bank number, the name of the bank and the account number and the sort code is already on it. Does this not matter at all?
Well, interesting point. You talk about checks. I mean, obviously, I think they're in their death throes in reality now. Checks.
Yeah.
Of course, in the next budget, I understand contactless payments on cards is going up to £100, so it'll largely, I think, retire traditional checks. But of course, the difference with a check is you're handing it to somebody or posting it to somebody who I would like to think you've confirmed their identity. You know who they are. People often ask me this about, giving their bank account details, their credit card details over the phone. And I use I use the example here. If you ring the builder's merchant because you want to buy a ton of sand, you've got the number for the builder's merchant, presumably from the Yellow Pages or whatever, or you've shopped with them before. You ring that number, you speak to somebody in the builder's merchants, and you are undertaking a transaction with them. You're happy to give them these details because you know who they are. You're confident. The difference is an hour later, if somebody from the builder's merchant rang you up, or somebody said, hello, I'm from the builder's merchant, something went wrong with your credit card payment, can you just read your number and your details back to me, please, so I can confirm that we've got the right details down? The difference there is you've received an unsolicited phone call from somebody whose identity you cannot confirm, who is asking you for privileged information. Now, where you're ringing them, you're in control. When somebody rings you, could be anybody, anywhere in the world. Same goes for a check, really. You know, when you're giving that privileged information, you're handing it to somebody you're comfortable with having that information, or you're posting it to somebody in an institution you're happy to receive that information. Same goes for the exchange of details. When you're in charge, you'll know where that is going. If somebody else rings you and asks for that information, you are not in control. So when you're in control, it's a different situation to when you're not. I hope that explains that really.
Yes, it does. Thank you. Yes.
Shannon?
Hi there. Thank you. I was just curious if there are resources that UK citizens can use to check out a website to make sure that it's actually a valid website. Are there resources like that available to your consumers?
Yes, if you, generally speaking, the wider internet is probably the best tool that you can use. So if you, even with a telephone number, you know, if you receive a call from a telephone number and you capture that number, if you put that into, you know, a search engine like Google, they will throw you back responses, and it's really effective actually. It will tell you if that, you know, people will be reporting that on various websites and forums, and very quickly you'll see if that's fraudulent. Same goes for email addresses or internet addresses. If you put that into a search engine and there's any fraudulent activity at all, you pretty much see that immediately. So good point actually, and thank you for making it.
Thanks, Shannon. Looking at time, I think we need to sort of roll things up there. So, George, could I ask you to please? Oh, Terry, was that a question you got there?
I have, and an observation.
Quick question, Terry, and then I'll pass over to George for the vote of thanks. So, far away, Terry.
Well, if you're a suspect of a fraud, you can actually get your banks to work with you, and the bank will work with you. Well, in actual fact, if you someone is fraudulently using your account or about to use your account, if you notify the bank that you obviously do not spend over X amount of money per month, whatever, the bank will check your transactions and they will stop the payment going through until they've verified it with you. And what the bank does, they actually send you a text message to say that someone has authorized payment on your account to XYZ. If this is not you, please notify the bank right away. Now that saves you spending a lot of money and getting caught. I recently had a situation like that where someone had cloned one of my cards and they were spending money in Glasgow. Of course, that's way from Plymouth, so the bank immediately rang me and said, "Are you in Glasgow? Are you spending money with a company in Glasgow?" And it was the outdoor centre. They spent, or purported to spend, £350 on some clothing garment. The bank stopped the transaction. I didn't lose any money. I don't know if they got any money, but they didn't get my money. And I therefore would say to you, if you are online buying products from around the world or different companies or advertising agencies, whatever, notify your bank first that you're going to make the transaction if it's a lot of money. And the bank will work with you.
I would absolutely echo that, sir, and thanks for making the point. I mean, all banks will have their protocols. It depends on which bank you're with, but definitely with touching base with them if you have concerns, and you can put a block on your account. You know, you can't spend more than £1,000 or whatever without your specific authorization. So yeah, worth speaking to your bank if you've got big concerns about it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Terry. George, could I ask you to give the vote of thanks, please?
Yes, I would. Thank you. I'm not muted now, am I? No. Be an awful lot of waste of time to give a vote of thanks if you were muted, wouldn't it? But that was fascinating, wasn't it? We all hear a lot about it. In fact, last week twice I was rung up by somebody who sounded incredibly plausible because of they were terribly worried about my national insurance number. I'm not too sure what they were going to do with it once I told them what it was, but I didn't. So I think we can all learn from this. Most of us have had minor brushes with them. Personally, I find I don't say no. I just put the phone down. It's probably the easiest thing of all. But I agree that that doesn't help the authorities knowing that it's happening. but there you are. That's all I can do with it. So thank you very much for an extremely interesting and probably a very helpful talk. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.